You are smart. You work hard. You show up every single day. And yet the money never seems to compound the way it should. The account grows slowly, or not at all. The raise comes and disappears into the same expenses. The business moves forward, but the gap between where you are and where you want to be never seems to close. This is not a story about bad luck. It is not about the economy, your industry, or the circumstances you were handed. It is about something far more specific and far more correctable. It is about the relationship between your mind and money, and almost nobody ever teaches you how to get that right. 2,000 years ago, 3 men understood something about money that almost nobody today is teaching. Seneca built one of the largest private fortunes in Rome. Marcus Aurelius managed the finances of an empire at war. Epictetus owned nothing and arrived in Rome as a slave. 3 completely different lives, 3 completely different financial realities, and yet all 3 arrived at the same conclusion about what actually determines whether a man builds lasting wealth, watches it slip through his hands, no matter how hard he works. What they understood comes down to 5 specific truths, not principles pulled from motivational content, not repackaged advice dressed in historical clothing. These are verified insights drawn directly from their original writings, and each one will force you to look at your financial life from an angle you have probably never considered. Truth number 1. Why intelligent people stay poor. Most people who fail to build wealth are not lazy. They are not uneducated. Many of them are among the hardest working people you will ever meet. And that is precisely the problem. Epictetus, a man who spent the first decades of his life as a slave with no property, no rights, and no legal claim to a single coin, understood something about effort and its limits that most people never confront. In the discourses recorded by his student Arrian, Epictetus returned repeatedly to a distinction that defines the financial lives of almost everyone who hears it. The distinction between what is in your control and what is not, between the faculty of your own judgment and the external circumstances it operates within. Here is how this destroys intelligent people financially. Intelligence, applied without direction, becomes the most sophisticated tool for self-defeat available to the human mind. A smart person working in the wrong direction works harder, justifies longer, and defends their position more cleverly than anyone else. They are, in the language of Epictetus, exercising tremendous effort on things that are not in their power, while neglecting the one faculty that actually is, the quality of their own judgment about where to direct that effort. Consider what this looks like in practice. A man spends 15 years building expertise in a field the market has stopped rewarding. He is genuinely skilled. He works longer hours than his peers. He takes pride in his craft. And yet the financial return never matches the input, because the input is being directed by assumption rather than examination. He has never stopped to ask whether the market values what he is producing. He has confused effort with direction. This is not a character flaw. It is a thinking flaw. And Epictetus was specific about the cure. In the Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 4, on the subject of progress, he distinguishes between the person who improves their external circumstances and the person who improves their faculty of judgment. The first chases outcomes. The second refines the instrument that chooses which outcomes to pursue. Wealth, in the Stoic framework, follows the second path, not the first. The question Epictetus would ask you is not how hard you are working. It is whether you have examined the assumptions underneath the work. Whether the direction you are moving in is one you have chosen through rigorous judgment, or one you fell into and have been defending ever since with the full force of your intelligence. Intelligent people stay poor because they apply a sophisticated mind to an unexamined premise. The work is real. The effort is real. But the foundation it is built on has never been questioned. And no amount of intelligence, discipline, or hours logged will compensate for effort that is pointed in a direction the market was never going to reward. Truth number 2. The real price of everything you buy. Seneca opened his entire collection of letters to Lucilius with a single command that had nothing to do with philosophy in the abstract. He wrote in letter 1 of the letters on ethics, "Gather and save your time. Not your money, not your energy, your time." And he was precise about why. Time, he argued, is the one resource that cannot be repaid once spent. Every other loss can be recovered. Time cannot. This is the foundation of one of the most practically useful financial insights the Stoics ever produced, and almost nobody frames it this way today. Every purchase you make has 2 prices. The first is the number on the tag. The second is the hours of your life you will spend working to cover it. And Seneca's argument is that most people religiously track the first price while remaining completely blind to the second. They negotiate on cost. They comparison shop. They wait for sales. And then they sign up for a monthly subscription without ever calculating how many hours of their finite life that commitment represents across 5 years. This is not a trivial observation. It is a framework that changes every financial decision you make once you truly internalize it. A car payment is not $350 a month. It is the number of hours you must trade your time to generate $350 after tax every single month for 5 years. A lifestyle upgrade is not a higher rent. It is the additional hours per year you have permanently committed to an employer, a client, or a market in exchange for the ability to maintain it. Seneca watched this pattern destroy financially sophisticated people in Rome. He wrote in letter 1 that the largest portion of life passes while people are doing things that are not to the purpose. They are busy. They are productive by every visible measure. But the output of that busyness is not building toward anything they actually chose. It is servicing a cost structure that accumulated through habit, social pressure, and inattention. The practical application Seneca would offer is not asceticism. He was not preaching that you should own less or live poorly. He was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, and he made no apology for it. What he was insisting on is that every financial commitment should be a conscious one, that you know exactly what you are trading in units of your irreplaceable time before you commit to it, and that you periodically examine the cost structure of your life with the same ruthless honesty you would apply to a business you are auditing. The question he would ask you is not whether you can afford something. It is whether the hours of your life you are exchanging for it are worth what you are receiving in return. Most people never ask that question. And that is precisely why, as Seneca observed in that same letter, time is the one loan which even a grateful recipient cannot repay. Truth number 3, the poverty nobody can see. Seneca was worth the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars by the time he was writing his letters to Lucilius. He owned multiple estates, had extensive political connections, and lived at a level of material comfort that very few Romans of any era ever experienced, which is precisely what makes what he wrote in letter 2 of the letters on ethics so striking. He wrote that it is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the man who craves more. And then he defined the proper limit of wealth with 2 conditions. First, to have what is necessary. Second, to have what is enough. This was not the observation of someone preaching poverty from a position of deprivation. This was a man who had everything, who had watched what the relentless pursuit of more did to people across every level of Roman society, and who had identified a specific pattern that no amount of money ever resolved on its own. The pattern is this: there is a version of financial ambition that has a direction, a purpose, and a defined destination. A man who wants to build enough to educate his children, retire his parents, and own his time outright has a goal that is finite and meaningful. When he reaches it, he experiences something that functions like satisfaction. The effort was connected to a reason. The reason had a boundary. And then there is another version that looks identical from the outside, but operates on entirely different logic. The man who earns more because more always feels like it should be enough. Who upgrades the house, the car, the neighborhood, and discovers within months that the feeling of arrival he expected never actually came. Who hits the number he spent years chasing and immediately recalculates, deciding that the number was too small and the real target is somewhere further ahead. This is not ambition. In the language Seneca would recognize, this is anxiety wearing the mask of ambition. The Stoics had a precise term for the mechanism that drives it. They called it the hedonic treadmill, though not by that name. The observation that human beings adapt rapidly to improvements in their circumstances and return almost immediately to their baseline level of satisfaction. The new house stops feeling new. The income that felt like freedom becomes the floor from which the next climb begins. The achievement that was supposed to change everything becomes the thing you have now, ordinary and insufficient. What Seneca was identifying in Letter 2 is that this cycle is not solved by more money. It is solved by a specific internal discipline that he called knowing what is enough. Not in the sense of settling or giving up, but in the sense of having a clearly defined relationship between what you are building toward and why. The man who knows what enough looks like for him can pursue wealth aggressively, accumulate deliberately, and stop when he arrives. The man who does not know what enough looks like will run the treadmill regardless of the number on the screen. The wealth that Seneca built was real. The philosophy he applied to it was what kept it from owning him. Truth number 4. Money obeys the mind, not effort. In the opening chapter of the Discourses, Epictetus makes a distinction that sounds philosophical until you apply it to every financial decision you have ever made. And then it sounds uncomfortably practical. He identifies the one faculty that is entirely within human control, the right use of appearances. Not health, not wealth, not reputation, not any external outcome. The single thing a human being can govern completely is how the mind evaluates and responds to what it encounters. This is not a passive observation. It is the foundation of an entire financial philosophy. Most people operate under an assumption so deeply embedded they have never examined it. The assumption is that money responds to effort, that the input of time and energy, applied consistently and with sufficient discipline, produces a proportional financial output. This feels true because it is sometimes true. But Epictetus identified precisely why it fails as a reliable framework. It locates the driving force of financial outcomes in external activity rather than in the quality of the judgment directing that activity. Consider what this looks like in the real financial lives of the men this channel addresses. Two men work with equal discipline in the same industry for a decade. One accumulates wealth steadily. The other earns well, but watches it disperse as quickly as it arrives. The difference is rarely the effort. It is almost always the quality of the mental framework governing how each man evaluates opportunities, costs, risks, and the difference between what something appears to be worth and what it actually is. Epictetus called this the right use of appearances. In financial terms, it is the capacity to look at a business opportunity and see it clearly rather than through the distortion of hope or fear. To evaluate a spending decision by what it actually represents in time and future freedom rather than by how it feels in the moment. To assess a career move by the trajectory it creates rather than the immediate comfort or discomfort it produces. The man who has developed this faculty makes better decisions with modest resources than the man who has not developed it makes with significant ones. This is why Epictetus, a man who owned essentially nothing, produced a body of thought that Marcus Aurelius, one of the wealthiest men alive, studied and applied to the management of an empire. The quality of the instrument doing the thinking matters more than the size of the resources being deployed. Money, in the Stoic framework, does not obey effort. It obeys judgment. And judgment is the one financial asset that can be developed by any man, regardless of where he starts. Truth number 5, the wealth nobody can take. In Book 4, Chapter 1 of the Discourses. Epictetus opens with a definition of freedom that most people read as philosophical and miss as financial. He is free, Epictetus writes, who lives as he wishes to live, who is neither subject to compulsion, nor to hindrance, nor to force, whose desires attain their purpose, and who does not fall into that which he would avoid. He then spends the entire chapter demonstrating that this condition has nothing to do with what a man owns, earns, or controls externally. It has everything to do with what he has built internally. This is the final truth, and it is the one that Epictetus was positioned to understand with a biographical authority that no other Stoic philosopher could claim. He had arrived in Rome as property. He had no legal claim to his own body, his own labor, or a single coin. His owner, Epaphroditus, was a man of significant wealth and political influence in Nero's court. And yet, within that condition, Epictetus had developed something that Epaphroditus demonstrably did not have: a mind that could not be hindered, compelled, or destabilized by any external circumstance. In Book 4, Chapter 1, Epictetus writes directly that once false judgment about wealth is overthrown, wealth itself need no longer be destroyed, because it has no power over the man freed from that false judgment. Other people may be menaced by wealth, he argues, but every man has a ready means of defense, which is to secure a correct judgment about the thing itself. This is not an argument against building wealth. Epictetus is not preaching poverty. He is identifying the precise internal condition that determines whether wealth, once built, remains a tool or becomes a master. A man who has developed correct judgment about money can accumulate it deliberately, hold it without being owned by it, deploy it without being frightened by the prospect of losing it, and rebuild if it is taken, because the faculty that generated it in the first place is still intact. Epictetus writes in the same chapter that freedom is acquired not by the full possession of the things which are desired, but by removing the desire for what is not in your power. Applied to financial life, this means that the man who has built the inner capacity to generate value, to think clearly under pressure, to evaluate opportunities without the distortion of fear or greed, carries the most durable form of wealth that exists. Markets cannot crash it. Inflation cannot erode it. No external event can confiscate it. The outer wealth Epictetus never accumulated. The inner wealth he built with complete deliberateness across decades of the most constrained circumstances a human being can face. And when Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man on earth, studied the writings of a former slave to understand how to govern an empire without being destroyed by it, he was recognizing precisely this, that the foundation underneath all lasting wealth is a mind that has learned what it actually controls and refuses to be moved by anything it does not. That is where Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus all arrive from their completely different positions. Not as a motivational conclusion, but as a structural reality. The man who builds that foundation first builds everything else on ground that does not shift. Seneca built one of the largest private fortunes in Rome, and wrote that it is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the man who craves more. Marcus Aurelius managed the finances of an empire at war and never let the weight of it compromise the clarity of his judgment. Epictetus owned nothing, arrived in Rome as a slave, and produced a body of thought on wealth and freedom that the most powerful man on earth kept close and studied throughout his reign. 3 men, 3 completely different financial realities, and the same conclusion arrived at independently from opposite ends of the material spectrum. Wealth is not primarily a function of effort. It is a function of the quality of judgment directing that effort. The real price of everything you buy is not the number on the tag, but the hours of your irreplaceable life you are trading for it. The poverty that destroys most people financially is invisible on any balance sheet. The treadmill of desire has no finish line unless you define one. And the only wealth that no market crash, no government, and no external circumstance can ever remove is the one you build inside. These are not motivational observations. They are structural realities that Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus tested against the full weight of their actual lives. A man managing an empire. A man who built a fortune from nothing. A man who had everything taken and rebuilt from the inside out. The question they would each ask you is the same. Not how much you are earning, not how hard you are working, but whether the foundation underneath the work is one that will hold when the circumstances shift. Because they always shift. And the man who has built that foundation does not need circumstances to cooperate. He builds regardless. If this video changed the way you think about wealth, about Stoic philosophy, and about the relationship between the ancient mind and modern financial success, subscribe to the Stoic Compound. New videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And if this resonated, like this video and leave a comment below with the one truth that hit hardest for you. The philosophy that built empires is available to you right now. The only question is whether you are going to use it. The Stoic Compound, where philosophy meets prosperity.